If you enjoy peaceful stories like this, please consider supporting this channel by hitting the like, subscribe, and the bell icons to be notified of new videos as they're published. Now take a deep breath and allow the world to grow quiet. Let the soft whispers of the breeze and the gentle hum of nature envelop you. Sit back, relax, and prepare to be transported. And as the sun began to dip below the horizon, Kael and Ellerin approached a vast, untamed wood known as the Forest of Hollow Stars. The trees stood like silent sentinels, their silver bark gleaming in the gathering twilight. The air was filled with an otherworldly mist, and the leaves of the trees glimmered with a brilliant blue hue. The forest was ancient, untouched by time, and exuded an air of profound peace. Kael felt uneasy, the weight of the forest's presence heavy on his shoulders. This place, it feels like it's alive. Ellerin placed a comforting hand on Kael's shoulder. It is, he replied softly. These woods remember things the world has long since forgotten. The further they ventured into the forest, the more the world shifted. The chirping of birds died out, replaced by a profound stillness. The wind grew calm, and only the soft crunch of moss beneath their feet remained, a constant, comforting rhythm. Ellerin reached out with his hand, summoning a glowing orb of warm, pulsing light. It hovered above his palm, its soft illumination a contrast to the gathering darkness. Moving deeper into the forest, their breaths came in soft, measured inhalations, and their voices were barely a whisper. The glowing orb cast a gentle warmth upon the path ahead, its soft, rhythmic flickering guiding them through the forest's depths. Kael turned to Ellerin, curiosity in his eyes. I thought this place was sealed, he said. Why are we here? Ellerin looked at him with a solemn expression. It was, he replied. But there's something stirring in the roots, a long-forgotten sadness, and perhaps a truth that you need to witness. Kael felt a chill run down his spine, but he steeled himself, determined to understand what mysteries lay hidden within the Forest of Hollow Stars. Finally, after hours of slow and careful navigation, Kael and Ellerin stumbled upon a glade bathed in the soft glow of the moonlight. The silver beams filtering through the canopy spilled onto the glade, illuminating the clearing in a silvery, dreamlike shimmer. The moss beneath their feet became a lush carpet, rustling softly with each step. At the heart of the glade stood a broken statue, a winged woman with outstretched hands. Flowers bloomed from cracks in the stone, and soft glowing motes floated around her like a celestial haze. Ellerin knelt before the statue, gently brushing away the moss that clung to its base. The stone was cold and smooth under his fingertips, and he traced the lines of the wings reverently. Ellerin's voice was a soft whisper, his gaze fixed on the broken statue before them. She was a guardian, he said quietly, his fingers tracing the cracks in the stone. Of dreams, of peace. Kael stood beside him, his eyes never leaving the statue. What happened? Ellerin's head lifted slowly, his gaze meeting Kael's. The world forgot to believe. They set up camp near the grove, the soft crackling of the fire filling the air. The flames were an ethereal blue, casting a cozy, calming glow. Kael sat close to the fire, his gaze flickering over to Ellerin. You used to be like me, didn't you? He asked, intrigued. Ellerin chuckled softly, the sound rich and warm. I was more reckless, he replied. Kael couldn't help but tease. I don't see how that's possible. That night, Kael's subconscious carried him back to the forest, but it was different now. The stars were not lost in infinite blackness, but hung like shimmering lanterns from the trees above. The trees hummed a low, almost melodious song, their branches reaching out. The path was no longer dark. A strange, warm light lit the way, beckoning him forward. As Kael arrived at the heart of the forest, he found himself standing before a mirror-still lake. But instead of his own reflection, he saw the image of an older version of himself, clad in a cloak similar to Ellerin's, with a strength and wisdom in his eyes. The reflection's lips moved, but no sound emerged. Instead, a voice echoed in Kael's mind. To protect the light, you must carry the dark. The first light of dawn began to break over the horizon as Kael stirred awake. The fire was still crackling gently, and Ellerin was watching the changing sky. You saw it, Ellerin spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Kael nodded silently, his mind filled with the vivid dream. Ellerin's eyes met Kael's. Then it is time. But it was different now. The stars were not lost in infinite blackness, but hung like shimmering lanterns from the trees above. The trees hummed a low, almost melodious song, their branches reaching out. The path was no longer dark. A strange, warm light lit the way, beckoning him forward. As Kale arrived at the heart of the forest, he found himself standing before a mirror-still lake. But instead of his own reflection, he saw the image of an older version of himself, clad in a cloak similar to Ellorin's, with a strength and wisdom in his eyes. The reflection's lips moved, but no sound emerged. Instead, a voice echoed in Kale's mind. To protect the light, you must carry the dark. The first light of dawn began to break over the horizon as Kale stirred awake. The fire was still crackling gently, and Ilarin was watching the changing sky. You saw it, Ilarin spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Kale nodded silently, his mind filled with the vivid dream. Ilarin's eyes met Kale's. Then it is time. The massive trees, standing like ancient sentinels, opened their branches to reveal a well, surrounded by broken runes and flowers that glimmered faintly blue in the pale light. Ilarin's voice cut through the silence. The well of remembering. It holds the oldest truths, but it only reveals them to those who come with open hearts. Kale took a hesitant step forward, his eyes fixed on the shimmering water. As Kale peered into the well, fragments of scenes flashed before his eyes. He saw a younger Ilarin, fighting side by side with a warrior in gleaming golden armor, their movements a symphony of power and grace. Then the image shifted. The crystal towers crumbled, consumed by darkness. And then he saw himself, a child with eyes like stars, sheltered within a cradle in a forest grove. Kale's mind struggled to process the images, the weight of responsibility sinking in. Not as a knight, he finally spoke, his voice resolute, but as a bridge between two ages, between what was and what could be again. Ilarin watched him with a mix of sadness and understanding, his gaze heavy. Kale looked to Ilarin, his mind reeling. You knew, from the start? The sorcerer nodded. I knew the moment I found you, Kale. The forest, it called to you, just as it called to me. So many years ago. A moment of silence passed between them, the air rich with the scent of earth and the quiet whisper of the wind through the leaves. The stars twinkled gently in the night sky, reflected in the still water. Leaving the forest behind them, Kale noticed a change in the environment. The mist seemed to part before them, the air more breathable and the path more clear. The stars in the heavens burned more clearly. Ilarin's steps, though no slower, felt measured and more deliberate. He walked close to Kale, his hand gently touching the young knight's shoulder occasionally, not in need of support, but in a quiet display of affection. As they walked, Ilarin spoke softly, You will surpass me one day. A smile tugged at Kale's lips. Not yet, Ilarin nodded in agreement, his face betraying a hint of melancholy. No, he echoed, not yet. As they walked, the mist slowly obscured the forest behind them, hiding the forest of hollow stars from view, as if it had never been there at all. Though neither spoke the words aloud, both felt the difference. Kale's eyes were different now, reflecting an inner calm that had not been there before, and Ilarin, for the first time in many years, felt a warmth in his heart that had seemed lost to him. Quiet settled around them, wrapping them in a comfortable silence. The sun was still low on the horizon, its golden light illuminating the land with a soft early morning glow. The grass at their feet shone with dew, and their shadows stretched like ink stains across the hillside. They turned and looked back at the forest, the morning mist swirling around the ancient trees and the thick, silvery fog. It looked as it had for ages, still, silent, and untouched. They walked in silence, the only sounds the soft crunch of their boots on the ground and the whisper of the morning breeze. Ilarin walked carefully, his old body betraying no sign of fatigue. Kale kept close, his hand instinctively resting on the hilt of his sword. It was a familiar habit but not a fearful one. Finally, after a long pause, Kale said something. Ilarin. Ilarin stopped walking, his eyes fixed on the old stone standing in the grass. He placed a hand on it, running his fingers over the worn runes. Kale came to a halt beside him, waiting. The words from their conversation at the well still echoed in his mind, and the questions remained. After a moment, Ilarin finally spoke. Yes, it was the truth. The child was you. Ilarin's gaze stayed fixed on the stone, the runes carved into its surface almost like a memory etched in rock. He murmured, I knew it all. Kale's heart beat faster, realization sinking in. And you watched over me, he said, guarded me. Kale absorbed Ellorin's words, the wind carrying them gently across the hillside. You suspected, he echoed, but you waited. The morning held a hushed stillness, as if the very world was waiting with them. As the day wound down, Kale and Ellorin entered the village of Karen's Hollow, where houses were nestled into the curve of the hillside and windmills dotted the skyline. Children darted through the gardens, laughter and shouts filling the quiet air. The windows glowed with soft candlelight, and the scent of wood fires and cooking spices hung heavily. Kale noticed the villagers watching them, their eyes filled with curiosity and respect. As they settled into the cozy inn by the orchard, Kale posed a question. Is it always like this? Ellorin chuckled softly, his eyes distant yet amused. When you live long enough, he answered, everyone becomes either someone you helped or someone you've lost. The room was small, cozy, the bed soft and inviting. Moonlight streamed through the open windows, carrying the soft sounds of the night. As the fire burned low, Kale turned to Ellorin, who was seated in a worn armchair. Kale studied Ellorin's face in the flickering candlelight, the pieces of the puzzle slowly fitting together in his mind. He spoke slowly, a hint of realization in his voice. You didn't bring me to the forest just to show me my past. You brought me so I could decide who I'll become. Ellorin's eyes seemed to dance in the candlelight, their gaze steady and almost knowing. You're learning, he repeated softly, his voice carrying a touch of approval. In his dream, Kale found himself standing on a glass bridge. Stars gleamed above him, and below, the forest spread in an endless carpet of darkness. In the distance, a strange tower loomed, its windows lit by a soft, golden light. From the darkness stepped a woman draped in shadows, her voice at once unfamiliar and hauntingly familiar. You are not yet whole, she said, her eyes never leaving Kale's face. Yet you are no longer lost. She extended her hand, presenting Kale with a small silver key. It was shaped like a star, with a subtle glow within it. She leaned closer, her voice lowering to a hushed murmur. When the sky burns, you must return. Kale's dreams quickly faded, replaced by the sight of the small room and the soft glow of the fireplace. Ellorin was still sitting in the armchair, his gaze fixed on the night sky beyond his window. He spoke quietly, his voice barely disturbing the silence. You saw her, didn't you? Kale turned to Ellorin, the dream still vivid in his mind. He asked quietly. Ellorin looked away from the sky, his eyes fixed on Kale with an intense but somehow affectionate gaze. A piece of what's to come, he replied, his voice soft yet full of significance, and a reminder of what still needs to be healed. The new day began with the soft light of dawn. The air was sweet with the smell of blooming blossoms, and the voices of birds echoed through the forest. The road, once dusty and quiet, was now covered by a soft carpet of soft, loamy soil. The trees themselves were adorned with young leaves, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of new life. Kale discussed his dreams with Ellorin as they walked, and the old sorcerer listened intently, occasionally asking gentle questions to fill in the pieces of the puzzle. The room was small, cozy, the bed soft and inviting. Moonlight streamed through the open windows, carrying the soft sounds of the night. As the fire burned low, Kale turned to Ellorin, who was seated in a worn armchair. Kale studied Ellorin's face in the flickering candlelight, the pieces of the puzzle slowly fitting together in his mind. He spoke slowly, a hint of realization in his voice. You didn't bring me to the forest just to show me my past. You brought me so I could decide who I'll become. Ellorin's eyes seemed to dance in the candlelight, their gaze steady and almost knowing. You're learning, he repeated softly, his voice carrying a touch of approval. In his dream, Kale found himself standing on a glass bridge. Stars gleamed above him, and below, the forest spread in an endless carpet of darkness. In the distance, a strange tower loomed, its windows lit by a soft, golden light. From the darkness stepped a woman draped in shadows, her voice at once unfamiliar and hauntingly familiar. You are not yet whole, she said, her eyes never leaving Kale's face. Yet you are no longer lost. She extended her hand, presenting Kale with a small silver key. It was shaped like a star, with a subtle glow within it. She leaned closer, her voice lowering to a hushed murmur. When the sky burns, you must return. Kale's dreams quickly faded, replaced by the sight of the small room and the soft glow of the fireplace. Ellorin was still sitting in the armchair, his gaze fixed on the night sky beyond his window. He spoke quietly, his voice barely disturbing the silence. You saw her, didn't you? Kale turned to Ellerin, the dream still vivid in his mind. He asked quietly. Ellerin looked away from the sky, his eyes fixed on Kale with an intense but somehow affectionate gaze. "A piece of what's to come," he replied, his voice soft yet full of significance, "and a reminder of what still needs to be healed." The new day began with the soft light of dawn. The air was sweet with the smell of blooming blossoms, and the voices of birds echoed through the forest. The road, once dusty and quiet, was now covered by a soft carpet of soft, loamy soil. The trees themselves were adorned with young leaves, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of new life. Kale discussed his dreams with Ellerin as they walked, and the old sorcerer listened intently, occasionally asking gentle questions to fill in the pieces of the puzzle. The stream's surface was as still as glass, reflecting Kale's face with a clarity he'd never seen before. Here, the water itself seemed to listen, its soft rush seeming to say, "Tell me your thoughts." Kale studied himself, the reflection strangely calm and quiet. After a moment he turned away from it, a soft smile on his face. "It listened," he said quietly. Ellerin, who had been quietly watching, raised one eyebrow. "And what did it hear?" Though Kale and Ellerin knew not what the road ahead held, they felt a strange sense of anticipation. There was no fear, only a quiet expectation. This was not merely about destiny, or about some ancient flame waiting to be rediscovered. This was different. The road stretched out before them like a winding, shadowy path, long and unpredictable. They walked in comfortable silence, their footsteps echoing softly in the stillness of the early morning. The sun beat gently at their backs, the sky a quiet sea of blue above. Ellerin walked with the quiet, graceful stride of someone who has seen 1,000 days much like this. Kale followed beside him, his heart filled with a strange mix of anticipation and quiet calm. The days blended one into the next. The sun rose and set. Kale and Ellerin continued traveling eastward, their feet treading softly over a landscape dotted with hidden wonders. One morning, as the first hints of the coming dawn colored the sky, Kale looked at Ellerin, the question burning in his heart. "You said a journey isn't about reaching the end," he murmured, his eyes fixed on the older man's face, "but rather noticing when it's changed. How do you know when that moment comes?" They made camp for the night at the edge of an ancient cliff, and Kale's eyes widened as he beheld the landscape spread out before him. A vast basin, stretching out for miles in every direction, was bathed in a gentle glow. Ellerin's voice was hushed as he spoke, and Kale turned to find the old man standing beside him, gazing out over the darkened landscape. "This was once a city," he said quietly. "Long before there were kings or empires, they called it the shell of the world." Kale knelt on the stone, his fingers tracing the surface of the ancient stone. "It feels alive," he said softly, his touch gentle. Ellerin stood beside him, his eyes fixed on the pulsing, glowing crater. He replied in a barely audible whisper, "Everything remembers, even if we forget." They rested under the stars that night, the deep quiet hum of the crater a steady, ancient rhythm. In his dreams, Kale heard the wind whispering, carrying with it the soft echoes of longing and loss. The morning came soft and quiet, cloaked in a thick white blanket of fog. They moved cautiously, guided by the sound of running water and the calls of waking birds. In the mist ahead of them, shapes flickered and shifted, not frightening, but watchful. Eerily silent and graceful beings, shrouded by shadows, glided through the thick haze. Their faces were hidden, their robes flowing around them like the fog itself. Kale's hand went instinctively to his sword at the sight of the creatures, but Ellerin's steady hand on his wrist held him back. "They are the mist shepherds," the older man murmured, his voice gentle but firm, "guardians of the in-between." One of the shepherds, its faceless hood turned toward them, slowly stepped forward, its long-fingered hand extended. In its palm lay a shimmering, silvery object, a memory. A vision appeared, a memory like rippling moonlight. Kale saw a younger version of himself, bruised and broken and alone in the woods, on the day Ellerin had discovered him. Kale's voice shook as he whispered, "Why?" Ellerin replied softly, "To remind you what it means to be found." The memory faded, and the shepherds faded with it, melting back into the mist like ghosts. The vision faded, the shepherds melting back into the fog, silent and ephemeral, stayed rooted in place, his eyes still fixed on the spot where they had been. And then, for the first time in a long while, silent tears rolled down his cheeks. It was not a cry of pain or bitterness. Rather, It was a release of emotions he hadn't realized he had been holding back, a moment of profound understanding. As the day turned to evening, they came across an old chapel, its stone walls crumbling and its stained glass windows broken. Moss and vines grew along its decaying sides. Within the walls of the abandoned building, they found a fire pit, benches rotted away by time, and words carved into the stone above the altar. "Let those who are lost light the fire and be warmed." Elleren's hand lifted, and without a word, he cast a spell. The fire pit flared to life, its golden flames dancing with shadows, casting long, shifting shapes on the walls. Kale sat beside the glowing fire, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames. "I'm afraid of who I'll have to become," he admitted softly, the words barely audible in the quiet chapel. Elleren sat down beside him, the light from the fire painting his face in warm hues. For a moment, he said nothing. Finally, he added another log to the flames. "You should be," he replied quietly, "for power without fear forgets what it was meant for." Kale's gaze fixed on Elleren, his question hanging in the air. "Did you fear it too?" "Every day," Elleren replied. They stayed by the comforting fire, watching as the flames slowly reduced to glowing embers. Even sleep found them there, curling around them like a warm blanket, the night's silence broken only by the occasional whisper of the wind through the broken glass windows. And in the stillness of the night, they found unexpected peace. As dawn broke, they departed the crumbling chapel, leaving the quiet night behind. Ahead of them, a narrow, twisting path led upward toward a distant peak that vanished into the clouds. "The star spire," Elleren murmured, his gaze fixed on the mountain, "where fate ends or begins." The journey up the mountain was silent, the sound of their footsteps the only sound on the winding trail. On their way up the mountain, no dangers appeared. There was only the wind, the endless sky, and the thoughts that filled their minds. At the peak, a tall, smooth black stone stood alone against the sky. Elleren touched it gently, his eyes closed. Slowly, he began to kneel. Kale watched, frozen, his heart tightening in his chest. "Elleren?" he called out, his voice carrying like a whisper. Elleren's voice held nothing but peace and acceptance. "This is where I remain," he said quietly, "where the road ends for me." Kale stepped forward, his heart heavy with grief and anger. "No," he said, his voice betraying his pain. "You said we would finish this together." Elleren's smile was gentle, his eyes filled with the warmth of 1,000 memories. "We did," he replied. "But this is not your end. For you, it is your beginning." The black stone pulsated gently, then, once more, began to fade. No pain, no fear, like the soft light of the stars in a fading night. The final words from his lips were like a gentle breeze carrying the weight of 1,000 years, 1,000 tears, 1,000 hopes. "Protect the light." The silence was deafening, the weight of loss heavy on Kale's shoulders. Elleren's final words echoed in the air, "Be what I could not, and more." The wind rustled through the trees, and the sky was vast and endless. Kale stood alone, but his heart was not broken. Now, it was aflame with purpose. Kale slowly walked down the mountain, the black cloak of Elleren draped around him. In his chest, the light of the star spire burned softly, casting a warm glow. He moved at a steady pace, in no rush to be anywhere. But as he walked, something changed. The birds sang more clearly and the rivers glimmered like liquid silver as they wound toward the sea. The world was becoming more vibrant, more alive, as if the very air was changing, as if it knew. As the magic within him settled, it was not like a flame, but rather like roots. He retraced the steps he and Elleren had taken, back to the path through the forests, to the hollow and the woods that had seen them both. He finally came to stand at the edge of the forest, where the fog had once shrouded the ancient trees from sight. And there he knelt, his voice soft and sincere as he whispered his words of gratitude. "Thank you." The wind gently carried his words, catching them like feathers upon its current and letting them drift into the trees. And from somewhere distant, from places only accessible to the realm of the magical, a soft, quiet voice echoed like a whisper across the water. "You are ready." As the whispered words echoed through the trees, an air of comfort and acceptance filled the forest. The stars sparkled down like silent witnesses, remembering every moment. In the gentle hush of the night, the road continued to stretch out, unrushed and open. Now, nestled in the farthest corner of the world, where mountains floated like islands above winding rivers, there was a hidden valley called Mistmere. Here silence reigned, broken only by the soft calls of distant birds and the whisper of clouds brushing treetops. A narrow path cut through the valley, winding around ancient trees and mist-shrouded springs. Along it walked two figures. One was young, armored, with golden hair tousled by the wind. The other was cloaked in deep navy robes, with silver streaks in his beard and arcane energy flickering faintly around his fingers. Their footsteps echoed softly against the stone path as they moved, every noise carrying through the silence. "Master Ellerin," the young knight said, his voice low and thoughtful. "How much farther until the ridge?" "Not far, Kale," the older man replied, his voice rich and calm like an old river. "But the journey is more than distance. You'll find that out soon enough." Kale adjusted the sapphire blade at his side. "You always speak in riddles," Ellerin replied with a slight smile. "And yet, you follow," he said. The sky began to soften, the gold fading to rose. The mist that clung to the valley floor shimmered like a dream, swirling around them like a phantom. By twilight, the two travelers reached the ridge, a narrow stone path that ended at a precipice overlooking a ruined castle floating among the clouds. The sanctuary of Lysra. "This was once the heart of the world," Ellerin murmured, "where magic was born." "Where I was born," Kale gazed out at the ruin, feeling the wind tug at his cloak. It whispered secrets against his skin. Kale turned in quiet awe, his gaze moving to Ellerin. "You never told me you came from here." "There is much I haven't told you," Ellerin admitted, his hand rising and the amethyst crystal on his chest pulsing gently. "But you are ready now." The wind shifted, a hush falling over the ancient sanctum. Stone bridges appeared across the floating ruins, connecting the ledge to the sanctuary. Step by step, the two walked across, passing over the still lakes and silent gardens. Stone arches, eroded by years, leaned over wild gardens where moonflowers bloomed in silence. Silver vines crept across forgotten runes carved into the stone. Ellerin halted before a giant obsidian mirror, shattered with time. Ellerin's voice softened, so gentle it was barely audible over the wind. "This place remembers me," he whispered, "and it remembers you." Kale blinked. "Me?" Ellerin turned to him fully now, his gaze more tender than Kale had ever seen. "You were not just chosen by sword," he said. "You were born of light and shadow like this place. Our bond is deeper than student to teacher." A shift in Kale's heart, a quiet warmth he had never felt before. He placed his hand on the mirror and his reflection shimmered yet remained still. And then, his reflection bowed. A soft magic filled the sanctuary, rising like mist over the stones. "Your power's awakening," Ellerin said. "You are the bridge now, between what was and what must come." "But why me?" Kale asked. "Why not you?" Ellerin's eyes glinted with light. "Because I am the last of my time," he said. "Are the first of yours." Above them, stars began to fall, not as fire but like fireflies. The ruined spires slowly mended. The flowers in the garden glowed blue. For a single breathless moment, time itself reversed. The years retreated, healing the ruins like a wave washing away the present. The sanctuary was whole once more. Ellerin placed a warm hand on Kale's shoulder, and the ancient magic passed as memory, as truth, as love. As the first rays of dawn pierced the clouds, the sanctuary shone with new life. "You carry the past in your scars," Ellerin said thoughtfully, his eyes never leaving Kale's. "And I see the future in your eyes." Kale stood alone on the high ridge, yet he was not alone. Ellerin's cloak was draped around his shoulders, a comforting presence. As the sun began to rise, the young knight turned his gaze to the horizon, a faint smile tugging at his lips. The future was beginning, and Kale was ready. "Sleep now, my friend. The world is still turning, but here in Mistmere, all is quiet, all is safe, and a new dawn is coming."